Hello again. Welcome to our third In-Goop Health digital session. I'm Elise Loehnen. I'm the Chief Content Officer of Goop, and this is my living room. Apologies in advance if you hear leaf blowers, you see cats, you see kids. We're all doing our best. And apologies if we have any technical issues or I go a little fuzzy. I'm sure, like you, everyone in my neighborhood is Zooming like mad. But I appreciate the fuzzy filter, so I'm going to go with it. So, for those of you who are new, this is a weekly gathering every Wednesday, a chance for us to come together in community and sample a little bit of what we typically do at an In-Goop Health live. If you missed them, you can see the first two sessions. The first was with Dana Childs, an intuitive, who led a workshop on how we can all develop those skills. I know, like you, I've been getting much closer to myself during this quarantine and really trying to figure out who I am beneath it all. And then last week, Gwyneth interviewed Julianne Hough, and she took us through a 15-minute Kinergy dance workout, which was amazing. And I can tell that some of you guys are going back to do it again and again. Today, I am thrilled to bring you Priya Parker, who wrote a beautiful book on the inside and outside called The Art of Gathering. The subtitle is How We Meet and Why It Matters. I had a chance to interview Priya pre-COVID many, many months ago in New York City and just love her. We took a long walk after. I didn't want to leave her. I asked her if she would be my new best friend. So I'm thrilled to see her again remotely. She is a master facilitator and actually sort of helps negotiate extreme conflict, but she knows how to bring people together in ways that matter and that have meaning. And her point is that, like me, I'm guilty of this. Many of us are chill hosts. This is in the golden days when we had opportunities to have dinner parties together, but people would come together and sorry, I think I'm having audio issues. Let's see if this works. So thumbs up if this is better. Okay, so people would come together and without meaning and without purpose. And so Priya's book is about that, how to re-architect the way that we come together so that it actually has impact. Okay, so without further ado, let's bring Priya. She also has a podcast with the New York Times called Together Apart, as she is helping people navigate these new times. So here she comes. Hi.
Hi, Elise.
How are you?
I'm gonna let you. I'm good. I'm good. I appreciate the embodiedness of this moment in quarantine and in Corona as you started pitch perfect and then slowly got more and more grainy. So it's nice to see you. And I also wish we were walking down the streets of Manhattan right now, and look forward to being able to do that again.
So how are you? Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, I think like so many people, I kind of go up and down. I am, very fortunate. I'm, physically healthy and safe, as is my family. And I think that this is a moment where, there are many moments at night when I wake up and feel kind of the larger weight of all of this globally. And just trying to take it one day at a time, and frankly trying to focus the lens of my work on what we can do now, even while we're apart. Kind of, one foot in front of the other.
So getting to that, I mean, one of the points that you make, which I think is so important, is that we can't gather, obviously, in the same way, but we shouldn't even try to force those constructs. Where should we start?
It's kind of an ironic time to have written a book called The Art of Gathering, when the world is ungathering. And in fact, the podcast that you mentioned, we've been a little inside, inside the kimono. We've been working on it for a year, and it actually used to be called Gathering with Priya Parker. And in March, a producer called me and said, if we continue down this road, it's going to be this now sounds like a horror film. It's the world kind of ungathering. And I noticed that my inbox and my emails and my DMs were still kind of filled with questions, but the questions became things like, how do we meaningfully connect while we're apart? How do we actually, do I cancel my wedding? Do I cancel my, birthday party? Do we cancel graduation? Do we try to do this while we're not together? And I noticed that at some level, the questions underneath them lead to many of the same answers that are true if we're meeting in person, which is where you start is purpose. Why are we gathering in this way? What is the need here in our community that we might address by bringing people together? And the biggest thing I would say is when we don't assume a form, right? And this is also true in our in-person gatherings, and we talked about this our last conversation on the podcast, then we actually free ourselves to say, what should this look like? So the biggest tip in terms of first thinking about your virtual gatherings for as long as we're in this quarantine time is to not assume that it's going to look the same online as it did off. You're not going to just kind of stick a Zoom camera in front of what you were going to do anyway. You actually have to pause. We have to pause and just rethink in entirety, what is the need now? And then how might we gather around it?
And what is the need? Is it closure? Is it new beginnings? Is it just to ease our anxiety and not feel so alone? I know it's depends on what the gathering is, but in terms of these big moments that people are missing, like graduation, weddings, seders.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with a simple example. My mother-in-law is a teacher, and thousands of teachers around the country, she now has to teach her course remotely and figure out how to do that. And she's a ceramics teacher. So at some level, you can't get more physical, right? There's a kiln. She literally pushes her students' hands to demonstrate the amount of pressure to put into clay. And if she had just thought, okay, now I have to teach ceramics, right, remotely, what do I do? She'd be stuck. And so she paused and asked the same question that we should all be asking, whether it's for a birthday or graduation or for a work meeting, which is, why do I do this? Like, what is the purpose of my class? And she thought, and she said, at the deepest level, the reason I do this is I want to show my kids, my students, that they can create something from nothing. And ceramics happens to be my medium. But right now, this is not going to work. Ceramics is my activity, not my purpose. And so she paused and she thought, how can I, over the course of all of these gatherings, which is her classroom, teach my students this? And she redesigned her classroom to be paper mache around found objects in the home. Mm-hmm. And every day, every class, she has 3 classes a day, she now teaches paper mache. But because she understood that she's not trying to replicate the activity or the form, she's trying to replicate the purpose. And if you're trying to replicate the purpose, the form actually might look different in this time.
Yeah. So I think all the parents out there are wondering about end of school year and thinking about, I feel terrible, obviously, for the kids who are graduating and having a really meaningful transition. But all the kids, there's no closure. So how do we address that on our own?
I think we go big and we go small. And what I mean by that, and this has been a conversation that's kind of been percolating over the last many weeks. I think probably now 3 or 4 weeks ago, a high school student on Twitter actually added Barack Obama and said something like, the class of 2020 doesn't have a graduation, will you be our speaker? And it got retweeted 32,000 times, or it was like 250,000 times, went totally viral. And I saw yesterday that Barack Obama announced that he, along with Michelle Obama, along with a number of other leaders from other parts of the, other industries, are going to be doing a live graduation ceremony, I think on May 16th. I've recently heard that Oprah is going to be doing one for the city of Chicago. And I've also heard Oprah apparently is everywhere. I don't know if it's actually, who actually claims, or Facebook is doing an Oprah related graduation. And I think that particularly around graduation, it's graduation for the seniors, but as a country and as a nation, it's also this moment we all kind of mark time, right? So what is graduation? It's not only for the seniors to look back on the 4 years of their high school or of their college and receive a diploma and go from student to graduate. But as a nation, every year there are certain convocation commencement speeches that go totally viral, right? They create a moment for all of us. So it's sort of graduation time. I remember years ago, Steve Jobs' speech went viral, right? You remember J.K. Rowling's speech go viral, right? Like this is actually, graduation in a way is actually every year a collective moment. We don't necessarily think of it that way. And so I think one of the things that's happening right now is it will be a collective moment again through some of these massive gatherings, which is a good thing. But the opportunity the rest of us have, right, those of us who are not Oprah, is to actually also meaningfully gather in small ways with our community, to not skip graduation. And so I've actually been talking with principals and administrators and teachers around the country who are all trying to figure out, what does graduation look like at a school level? With parents trying to figure out, what does graduation look like for our simple community? And I'll give a couple of just very simple tips. So the first is to actually talk to your graduates, if you're in a family, and ask them, what is it that they need, right? And to your question, Elise, is it closure? Is it time with your friends? Is it the physical, gowning process? And then to actually create an element of meaning making, right? Graduation is both a closing, but it's also an opening, like all rituals. And so allowing the classes and allowing family members to gather around meals before maybe the live streaming and actually tell stories about the last 4 years, invite community members over Zoom or over phone calls to say, what are the memories or the experiences of the stories that you think really marked this time? What have you learned? How have I seen you grow? And to actually have meaningful conversation around these moments where people can tell stories together of the time that has transpired, and also to still dress up, right? Part of ritual is actually the putting on of the clothing, is to putting on of the cap, of the putting on of the gown, of everyone else dressing up. And so it's really important. I think you could be part of a live stream collective ceremony with a Barack Obama as your speaker, or Oprah, or whoever the figure is. And if you don't also feel held by your individual local community, you can leave feeling still somehow a bit empty or ungraduated.
Yeah. No, it's hard. I think obviously the hardest part is that we have to do this with screens. And I think some people are taking to it so beautifully, and others, it's like, even between my two kids, one is good with it and the other is like no interest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like how do we find physical ways when we can't be together? Is it like the drive-by birthday parties? Or have those sort of run their course?
I think everything kind of runs its course, as we get tired of it. But the way I think about it is kind of, there's the non-technology kind of social distancing inventions. And those are things like on episode 2 of Together Apart, we had a birthday episode, and the first 5 minutes was a birthday party in a parking lot with 50 cars all in a circle, and it was for a 12-year-old boy. And the aunt who threw it ended up saying, it started to be, it initially was, a dance party. No one got out of the cars, but for Brennan, and just actually being there joyfully, it became for all of us. And so, and you see, in Ireland, you see the Irish wake being transformed, where people are no longer coming together, but coming and standing outside of their houses as the car goes by, right? And singing together. Like, there are temporary innovations about being together apart in person, 6 feet apart. And then there's this other side, which is trying to figure out how to do this through screens or through, and I think that's where some of the really interesting innovations happening. I was just trying to pull it up on my phone. I saw a tweet a few weeks ago by a guy named Aaron Z. Lewis, and he has this term, he calls it social skeuomorphia. And he says he's a designer, like a user designer, and he says social skeuomorphia is that feeling when you try to basically do exactly what you did offline, online, digital dinner party or digital date, and you actually leave feeling more lonely and anxious afterwards because the difference between the online and the offline is so stark. It's actually really upsetting, and that we actually need to tweak and rethink how we do these online. And in that tweet, somebody responded to him. I'm just going to read it to you because I think it blew my mind, and it may blow yours. So he tweeted this, and then somebody said, I think we need to find social moments. I can't find it right, so I still have to say it out loud. So he said the response said, I think we need moments of natively digital experiences. Let me give an example. And this guy tweeted about an example of a hot tub party that he was at, a Zoom hot tub party. Have you heard of this?
No.
A Zoom hot tub party where everybody was in their own bath, and it started, and he said, I've never experienced anything like it. So it's a hot tub party. Everybody was in their own bath at home over Zoom, and it's turned into a naughty truth or dare. And he was just describing it, and I love this example because it blew my mind open, not only because it was naughty truth or dare, but actually that we think that the only difference now and our only point of connection is this one screen. And like the image of people sitting in their own bathtubs, all having a hot tub, reminded me we have an entire universe behind us that we've only begun to think about how to explore. And so I think that I think one of the things that will come out of this time is us completely like experimenting and exploring with new ways of being together, even not physically. And I think we're only at the very like generation one version of creative ways to do that we actually couldn't do and weren't doing before.
Right. That's hilarious and terrifying. I can't. Is everyone naked, or are they?
I don't know. It was a tweet, and I didn't know him, but I think no, but I don't know. Maybe that was one of the truth or dares. But again, it's like gatherings are transformative when there's some amount of risk, right? And risk can be relevance. Risk can be psychological risk, can be vulnerability. It can be physical risk. One of the people I wrote about in The Art of Gathering is this woman named Ida Benedito, and she calls herself a transgression consultant, and she creates these like fake conferences in the Waldorf Astoria, at least used to, and people would have to wear a black tie on Saturday night, and they'd get a list of prompts, and it'd say things like, there's a wedding on the third floor, go and crash it and give a toast to the bride, right? And she creates these kind of like wild experiences for people, and part of her insight in what she creates is change only happens through risk, through disequilibrium, right? And what I'm interested in gathering, whether it's IRL or virtually, is transformative gatherings. Gatherings that simply where you leave slightly altered than when you came in. And that doesn't happen without some amount of risk. And so I think the hot tub example is this lovely example. It's risk in a certain context, right? But it's an example of actually creating a situation where the outcome is not predictable.
Right. No, I love it. I mean, so what's your best advice for those who just want to casually gather, catch up with friends, and how do you create, not a thesis statement for it, but like how do you create something that makes it more than just people getting sloppy
Hanging
on
out.
Zoom and talking over each other? 'Cause I'm kind of over the.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the first thing I would say, and this might seem counterintuitive, is for most of us, gathering better means gathering less,
Yeah.
right? You actually want to create some amount of demand, some amount of desire, some amount of need. And I'll give a very simple example. Actually today I was on a Zoom call for a friend who recently had a birthday. And at the end, and we structured it I actually didn't even structure it. Someone else did it. And I was like, thank God. And it was very simple, like a couple of things: how to move it from a Zoom call that everyone's just saying, hey, happy birthday, to actually something meaningful. So a couple of things. One is, she always wears headbands. She often wears scarves, and she looks like fabulous doing it. And we're all in different places, and a friend was like, why don't we all wear a scarf? And the two of us don't have scarves, so I put a kitchen towel around my head. Another friend put a napkin around their head, and another friend played music as she was coming in, and she just felt like, first visually she could just see that we were honoring her in this like playful way. But the second thing is, a friend asked all of us, she said, this is a tough moment right now. Bring a quality that our friend holds, and bring a story or a poem or something that reminds her of that quality that she holds. And so for like 40 minutes, we talked and caught up, but then the last 20 minutes, we actually all shared that quality with her. And it overcame the graininess of Zoom and like the loneliness of Zoom, because we created some structure that allowed for meaning. And at the end of it, actually, we were like, let's have lunch. And this goes back to the desire and need point. Let's check in. And one person said, every week? And I said, that feels like a lot. How about once a month? And I don't think that's offensive, right? In part because you want to actually need each other. I think one of the things we've been seeing, I know this is true in my family. I'm half Indian, and I have a lot of family in India. And when this first happened in early March, mid-March, for the first time ever, we had a multi-family, 4-generation multi-family Zoom call, right? And the first one, which is beautiful in part because it was novel, right? My 95-year-old grandmother was there, and like all of the grandchildren were also running in and out. And then we said, let's do it again, right? So the next weekend we did it, and it was like, oh, okay, it's not as, okay, we see you. And we start, and it raises this larger question that we all have, which is, what do we actually do with this time so that it's not only connecting, which is nice, but that it actually becomes meaningful and hits a need. And the way to do that is to have some amount of specificity and some amount of structure.
I think that and a little bit of easing on the introverts. I was having this conversation with my brother. I'm very introverted, so this time for me has been good. And my brother is very extroverted, and initially was sort of like doing Zoom cocktails every night. And then when we spoke yesterday, he said it had broken him sort of this addiction that he had to just compulsively socialize. But I wonder if it's not pushing us to our extremes a little bit. Like, I'm wondering how I'm going to go back to being with people. And so I just, what is,
as you're talking, a memory came to me. It's kind of a funny one. I did Vipassana probably 10 years ago or so in India, and it's this 10-day meditation experience in silence. And I lived in India in my 20s. I worked there, and so I did this experience, and on the 9th day, they allow you to kind of talk again, in part so that you're not completely shocked when you go back into society outside of the walls or the gates of the meditation space. And I remember when I left, I did it in Nashik in India, outside of Bombay. And when I left and I was driving back into Bombay, into Mumbai, and kind of hearing the lights and the sounds of just life again, I actually felt drunk. Like it was like I couldn't process all of the stuff that was happening to me. And I remember thinking, wow, like, are the colors always this bright, right? Are the sounds always this crisp? I was hearing it in new ways again. And I think when we're finally able to go back out again, I think we're all going to deal with it in different ways and feel kind of drunk without imbibing anything. But I think the other thing is, from everything I'm reading, there's no going back, right? So we're actually going into a future state where we'll also need to be processing new ways of still, whether it's standing 6 feet apart or not shaking hands, or finding new ways of navigating. So I think it's going to be pretty intense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's interesting too. I think initially we all at Goop had sort of this burning desire to get sort of back to normal. And now I'm like, I don't know how we're going to ever get anyone back into the office. This is a
Yeah.
different sort of freedom and we're just as productive. Um, and that brings me to a good audience question. I don't think I got to this before my audio went out, but please post questions and Priya will answer them. So virtual burnout. Katie asked, what do you suggest for virtual gathering burnout? Clearly, I think people who are trying to work from home want to throw their computers out the window by 3. Um, how do we find space for even the social part of that when it requires the same tools?
So it's
I
it's
know
it's really problematic. It's a great question. I mean, there's this great piece last week in the Times by Katie Bowles talking about how Zoom is terrible, and it's not just terrible because it's for privacy issues or for Zoom bombing, but because they're starting to realize that the way the data is pixelated, the way the bandwidth tries to the algorithm tries to save bandwidth, it's actually not allowing us to cognitively process the trust cues, and so we are often leaving more anxious and isolated, after a call. And so a couple of things. I think first is, and this was the recommendation in that piece as well, is if you can do it over a phone call, do it over a phone call. And I think in group calls that's actually complicated and it's people can check out. But if you can do it in a phone call, make it a phone call. If you can do it in an email, make it in an email. But I think the second is, in Zoom calls in general, to create yourself, if you're hosting, to create transition rituals for everybody, right? How do you open a call? It's kind of whiplash that you can actually now go from your workout from 2 to 3 p.m. to a board meeting from 3 to 4 p.m. to a birthday party from 4 to 5 p.m. to all hands from 5 to 6 p.m. and not leave a seat. It's very bizarre. And usually we at least have door frames to walk through, right? Or at least usually we have a car to get in and move from place to place. And so I think one of the things that we absolutely need as guests and as hosts is actually more explicit transition rituals. If you're hosting something for the first 5 minutes, find ways to cleanse your guest's palate. And that could be physically, that could be a stretch break. I did a call a couple of weeks ago with a repeated group that I facilitate, and people were getting kind of emotionally exhausted by the check-in, like, how are you doing? How are you doing? How are you doing? It's like, let's just get to the work. But we still wanted to do something to connect people. And so it was very simple. We had everybody stand in front of their camera, and I just said, close your eyes, take a couple of deep breaths, and put your body in a position. Put your body into a position of how you're currently feeling. And they moved, and now look at the screen. And a lot of people were like this, and then and take a couple of breaths and said, now invite your body to be in a position that will serve it for the next hour and serve the purpose of this meeting for the next hour. And then they did that, and it was just it was an interruption, right? It's not rocket science. And you can also do it intellectually, like mentally. I was on a call where I started a meeting by saying, what is a word or a phrase or a sentence that you've heard in the last week that has somehow helped you? Put it into the chat, right? And then you get 10 or 15 actually sentences that are really helpful for everybody else also, but also if you're paying attention, gives you a sense of where people are. So don't skip the transition ritual. Don't skip the opening of the world of your world that you're doing. And then also make sure you have time to close it. And that's actually one way I think, we need transitions between different worlds. And right now we can access these worlds faster and faster through Zoom.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And even just you can access the parts of your house and your, kids to pets to grocery store, and it's whiplash. We were talking about this in our all hands yesterday, and Gwyneth was like, please make sure every meeting. Sorry, I have a needy cat on my lap, but like make sure every meeting has purpose, and please leave 15 minutes or 10 minutes at the end so that people have a chance to stretch, to go to the bathroom. And I think we've certainly found that, and that was the experience of many in the first weeks, was that we were having meetings that we had normally had in person. And it was like, does this meeting have to happen? Can we let this one go? Does it have purpose? What is the agenda? And can
Are we
we
just on
sort of,
autopilot, or is there a real need here?
yes. And I think it's a good time for everyone to really do that audit and inventory of, because some people need it. Like some people need to do that daily connection, and some people don't. And I think it's painful for both to not get what they need.
Absolutely.
So
I mean, I'll just give a quick example, even just from an institution. Many of us are parts of different institutions, whether it's a teacher or a principal in a school, or in a workplace or a community. And I think episode 4 of Together Apart, we heard from teachers all over the country, and I ended up coaching. So each of these episodes are basically one person somewhere in the country trying to figure out how to host an online gathering that's been upended by Corona. And this is a 6th grade writing teacher in New Haven, Connecticut, Tanisha. And long story short, she was wondering how can she deal with attendance issues when she's trying to remote teach. What are the various gatherings that she should still, as a teacher, try to attend, right? She's often a volunteer at prom, or the teachers are often like ushers or docents at graduation. And the conversation we got to with her was, what is your purpose as a teacher? And then what's a gathering that allows you to embody that purpose? And she said, my purpose as a teacher is to build the confidence of my students to be able to express themselves in the written word. And she realized that the gathering of the year for her, that kind of proves if she was successful and if they got it, was a celebration that they do every year called Juneteenth. And in this school, Juneteenth was the moment where the 6th graders brought their own writing and read aloud to their community their writing. And so for that teacher, it's like the decision filter. That was a gathering she absolutely should fight for and figure out how to transform online. And the others may just fall by the wayside this year, and that's okay. So part of discernment to get to burnout is also not only what is the purpose of the meeting, but what is my purpose? Like, what is my primary purpose in my family right now? What's the need that I want to fulfill as a friend, as a community member, in my workplace? And then what are the gatherings that fulfill that? And what can we just say, we're exhausted, not this year?
yeah, no, for sure. And it does feel overwhelmed, and I think teachers are being put in this totally bizarre position, particularly because they typically rail against technology, and now they're required to use it, and it's like, let's figure out what we can let go of and what's essential for.
Yes.
I have first graders, so all right. So Hara asks, how can people best re-enter the physical gathering world after having gone through this traumatic and isolating experience?
It's a beautiful question. I think that, when we come out, transitions are beautiful opportunities for ritual. And what ritual, the best definition I've heard of a ritual comes from a anthropologist, ethnographer named Jonathan Cook, and he says all ritual is a transference of state. You go from a state to a state. And so like your morning cup of coffee is a ritual from night state to day state. And all of us, as we begin to exit our homes, whenever that is, are going to be going through a massive transition. And my suggestion is either for yourself or even more powerfully within your community, whoever that might be, you actually create a ritual to say, okay, what has happened during this time? What is it that we've learned, right? You can do it in an evening. What is it that we have learned? What is it that I want to keep from this time? What is it that I actually want to shed that this time taught me? I've realized I don't want to travel so much, and so I commit to my family that even when I can travel again, I won't do it as much. Whatever it is, so you make meaning together with your community, and then you have a two state. You transfer. So what does it mean? We're gonna light this candle, or we're gonna put on our running shoes, or we're gonna whatever. Like, we're gonna throw away our masks. Like, what is the cleansing, and then how do you step back out into the world? I actually think we are now in a moment where we, fortunately or unfortunately, need to create our own rituals, and to go back out into post-corona state is a transition that needs to be marked.
This is an interesting question. Adriana is asking about the awkwardness around virtual gatherings and how will this affect us in the future post-coronavirus? Like, does that just dissipate?
Well, I would ask a follow-up question. Is like, which type of awkwardness are you referring to? You know, I think that virtual gatherings are highlighters of dynamics that have always existed, right? But there's like, it's like we can't pretend they're not there anymore. There was this great example in Forbes, I think last week, of a man writing about realizing that he was a man-terrupter, right? And he thought he was like so woke on, offline and all these things, and all of a sudden he realized that because of the way the algorithm chooses which mic to promote, he kept on he was getting a lot of stage time. And so I think that an opportunity in terms of this awkwardness is it actually highlights the inequalities. It highlights the dynamics that we can actually now see so that we can change. But in terms of coming back, I think that one of the things that we'll see is how many tools we have when we don't have to mediate through these mechanisms, and actually remember, I mean, I've always thought gathering is really important, right? And I think like the world now sees actually this is a social X-ray of our time and how much we can actually do when we are together. How much we read body language, how much, I think we could have like goes back to the ritual. It's like a funeral for awkward Zoom parties, right? We're not going to have one Zoom party for the rest of the year. Like there's no way I'm going to join another Zoom party. But I don't think the awkwardness will last, in part because I think we'll be so relieved to come back together. And then the last thing else I say, like awkwardness is okay, right? A huge amount of the hosts that create transformative, memorable gatherings are the ones that push past people's fears a little bit, push back the eye rolling a little bit to allow them to actually create something different. And so, a lot of the people I interviewed for the Art of Gathering identify themselves as introverts, identify themselves as suffering from social anxiety, in part because they create the gatherings they wish existed. And they're willing to hold that discomfort and that awkwardness a little bit longer to help create that world.
Yeah, and to police both the attendees in terms of who comes and also who doesn't dominate or who does dominate. I mean, like, I think this is such good, just so you guys can see it, because the paperback's out now, right?
It is. The paperback is out 2 weeks ago.
Oh, nice. Congrats. It's such a great thing to read now as we think about and prioritize how we, who we're going to see and how we're going to see them, because it's probably not going to be a free for all. This is an interesting question. So Grazka, hopefully I pronounced that right, asks, how do you envision dating and finding Mr. Right or Mrs. Right after lockdown? I mean, that's tough, right? I'm assuming people are still Tindering like crazy, but how is this going to transform making out?
I mean, I think I don't, on the physical side, I don't know. And I think, I think there was, I was listening to a podcast, I think it was The Daily, where the health reporter was saying that one of the things that will happen, that he predicts will happen, is immunity becomes a social status, right? Like I already got the virus, or like I'm immune. And again, trust mechanisms is like, are people telling the truth or are they not telling the truth? I think that, so I could actually see I'm making this up, but I could actually see on certain sites, like having, a little verified immunity thing, you know what I mean? Like, it's sort of like an episode of Black Mirror. But I also think that, if you think about Love is Blind or any of these other elements, one of the things at this moment is forcing us is when you can't physically engage, whether it's, making out or whether it's like playing soccer, we have to focus on meaning making through what we have, and what we have is dialogue, is language, is conversation. And so I think, and I've heard that from friends who are dating, which is at some level, some of this dating, whether they're having more phone calls through apps, that it feels more of a relief. That you don't, that some of the pressure's off on the physical, that you can actually get to know people. So it sort of depends on why you're dating. But I think for those who are looking for a meaningful connection, at some level, it's almost like it puts it on pause temporarily. But
Yeah.
that can also become frustrating for its own reasons.
There are going to be some amazing modern love columns that come out of this time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Uh,
And in an only Corona way, I'm seeing a little.
Wait, I lost you. Okay, I can't hear Priya. So I'm just going to take the stage for a minute. Sorry again. Um, let's see if we can get her back in. I wish I were an expert on gathering, but as explained, I am a lazy host. Chill host is what I thought I was until I read Priya's book, which really I'm lazy in the sense that um, I typically let people come together if I'm hosting a dinner party and then offer no direction. And Priya's point is that we have to take a more active role in bringing people together and ensuring that people aren't just like, that was a good chicken, but that they leave feeling inspired and enhanced, and moved and changed. Um, let's see if we can get Priya back. If not, I'll let you guys go. All right, as she mentioned, I'm going to wrap it up because we're close to our hour anyway. Apologies to the people whose questions we did not get to. Priya's book, really worth reading in this moment of time as we do an inventory of why we meet and how, and as we consider how we're going to come together in these post-corona times. So thanks again for coming. Apologies for our sound and technical issues. I am my own IT support, and we see how that goes. We will see you again next week. And to those who donated, thank you. Not required. I know that everyone is doing the best that they can, that there are a lot of asks out there. If you feel compelled, please donate to Doctors Without Borders. You'll see the button in the corner. And Priya says thank you. And listen to her podcast with the New York Times, Together Apart. She is so wise and so lovely, and I wish I could hug her. All right, so find more of her on Together Apart, pick up paperback of her book, and we also spoke in the not too distant past on the Goop podcast, so that's a great place to get more Priya too. Just sending a big virtual hug. Thank you and goodbye.